everyone! So in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the crested gecko and the leopard gecko to determine what is the best beginner gecko. Now both of these geckos, the crested and the leopard gecko, are two geckos that are generally the best for beginners. Some things that I'm going to be addressing today are the overall setups. Then I'm going to be talking about feeding, and then besides feeding, just the daily care and the monthly maintenance that both of these geckos require, and whether or not one is harder than the other. Then I'm going to be talking about overall their personality, their ability to be tamed, because that's very important to some people. And then after that, we'll just be talking about which one I believe to be the easiest. So with that being said, let's get started. So I'm going to start off with talking about just the overall intensity of the setup. And what I mean is whether or not they need heat, lights, humidity, no humidity, basically the overall habitat that these geckos live in. So both of them do not require lighting, so that is something that you don't need to consider. What you do need to consider is heating. A crested gecko pretty much thrives in room temperature, but when it comes to a leopard gecko, they need a heat mat. They need that heat gradient along the bottom, they need to have a warm side, a cool side, and then kind of a midway point in the middle. When you have a heat mat, you also need a thermostat. So you will require heating for a leopard gecko that you won't require for a crested gecko. So therefore, setting this up will be a little bit more expensive. Now when it comes to the decor, this is an area that I can't really touch on. There's so many different ways to decorate your enclosure and so many different ways to style it. So I'm gonna give kind of like a little bit of a rough statement, but I'm not gonna be able to go completely in depth here. Hypothetically speaking, you want to entirely decorate your enclosure here, your crested gecko enclosure, with magnetic ornaments. You can spend almost $40 for a single hide, but if you get a suction cup one, it can be 10 to 15. It also depends on where you buy them. For a leopard gecko, same thing kind of goes. You can make a human hide out of literally an old yogurt container, or you can spend almost $40 on a hide. I am not a fan of the yogurt container hides. I generally spend a little bit more, so it's kind of not an easy statement for me to say. Your crested gecko enclosure is going to be filled with plants and vines and everything like that. Meanwhile, leopard gecko enclosures, some people have them quite sparse. Just have their 3 hides, maybe a plant, a couple food dishes, and you're done. You can have your leopard gecko enclosure very full, like mine is, especially because my gecko is young. But really, you could just have 3 hides and not very much, and some geckos don't mind that at all. Overall, to decorate your enclosure, this is going to be more expensive. But to equip it with the technology it requires, your leopard gecko is going to be more expensive. So now, moving on to feeding. How much does feeding cost? What does feeding entail? Now, the crested gecko can eat insects, and the leopard gecko must eat insects. The primary food source for a crested gecko is going to be something called crested gecko diet. It is basically a powder you add water to, stir it up, and you leave it in their enclosure in a food dish, and they will, lick it up when they're hungry. The crested gecko powder is going to go a very long way, and you don't have to worry about trying to keep it alive. Insects, you have to feed the insects to keep them alive. You have to have a specific setup for your insects so that they, don't die. And then, of course, you're going to have to keep replacing them, and they're going to be a little bit more expensive. So overall, the leopard gecko does require more work than the crested gecko does when it comes to feeding. This one, you can buy little jars of powder, and this one you have to feed insects. Overall, the jar of powdered food can be a little bit expensive, but it goes a really, really long way. Meanwhile, you'll have to keep replacing your insects quite often. Now that kind of moves me on to my next point, and that is overall personality. What are their personalities like? How easy are they to tame? When will I see them? When are they active? Are they active? I'm going to address all of that now. Now, when it comes to picking out your gecko, sometimes you get a gecko and you really think it's going to be a pet to bond with, and sometimes they're just not. Crested geckos, they can be tamed, but they're very, very jumpy, so it's a very, very hard thing to do. My crested gecko does not like being handled at all. So if I got a crested gecko because I wanted to hold him, I would be sad because he doesn't let me. And my leopard gecko, she does let me hold her, and it was a very easy process. If your leopard gecko is let out of its enclosure, it can run around, but it can't climb up your walls, it can't jump far away. This guy's jumpy. That's what they do. That's how they get around in the wild. Now, when are your geckos going to be active? Now, it is a common misconception that a leopard gecko is nocturnal. It's actually what is known as crepuscular. Now, this means that it's active at dawn and dusk, or early morning and early in the evening. So it's not nocturnal, but it also isn't awake during the day, and these guys, crested geckos, are entirely nocturnal. So overall, if you're getting your first gecko and you really want to see it moving around because you really want to have that fun pet, I would say a leopard gecko is probably the best one, because most people, when they get a pet, they're going to want to see it move. And this one is like the pet for night owls. Now we're moving on to our last section, which is the care. This is the daily and monthly maintenance of taking care of these pets. Now, every day you should remove the droppings from your enclosure. Now, I say daily, but sometimes they won't go every day. It depends on what your gecko is eating, how old they are, and everything like that. Generally, I like to spot clean the area to make sure that there's no waste sitting in the enclosure all the time. Now, crested geckos generally choose to go to the bathroom wherever they want, and it's generally a little bit more on the liquidy side. A leopard gecko, when they go to the bathroom, is pretty much all solid, and they generally pick one spot of their enclosure and choose to only go there. Meanwhile, a crested gecko goes everywhere, so cleaning up after it is a little bit more complicated. There's one thing that is very important with a crested gecko that you don't have to do with a leopard gecko. You have to keep your crested gecko's enclosure very humid, which means you have to mist it about twice a day, once in the morning and once at night, to keep the humidity high. If you decide not to do so, your gecko will not be in the proper habitat, and then things can start to go wrong. So you really need to be up on your daily care with this gecko, because it does require you to mist it. This is not something that you have to do with the leopard gecko because they live in a desert environment. Really, there's nothing with a leopard gecko that if you decide to skip a day, it will have harm on your gecko. So overall, the easiest gecko to take care of daily is the leopard gecko. Now, the crested gecko also has more complicated monthly maintenance. When you spray down your enclosure, no matter what water you're using, you're going to get some little white droplets on your tank that are known as mineral deposits. And these are quite difficult to get off, and it also makes you have to clean your tank more often. So you should use either a lime scale remover or even vinegar to try to scrub off those droplets, because if they accumulate too much, your gecko actually has trouble sticking. And every now and then you want to kind of throw out the moss and just make sure it stays clean, to make sure that the waste is gone, it doesn't get moldy, things are being rotated around, the mineral deposits are gone, and everything like that. So overall, the cleaning for this one is very intensive. I would say I do this one 2 to 3 times as often as I do my leopard gecko enclosure, because occasionally I'll just clean up clean their water dishes, clean the substrate, wipe up the calcium, everything like that. But it's mostly just never-ending spot cleaning. There's never really a need for a full deep clean with a leopard gecko. Now, looking at the tallies of everything that we've discussed today, we can see that the best beginner gecko is the leopard gecko. Now, I actually did not think that this was going to be the way that it was going to go. I was actually strongly thinking it was going to go in the favor of the crested gecko. So I'm pleasantly surprised. So with that being said, I hope you found this video helpful, or at least a little bit entertaining. Maybe you are looking to get your first gecko and you want to know which one is better for you. If you have a different opinion on something than what I've mentioned in this video, leave a comment down below so that other pet keepers can see them. But that is all for today. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, then make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified when I upload. Bye guys!